that, Michael. I mean, I can definitely empathise with what Craig said. I mean, I'm of that kind of generation as well, and happily managed to avoid sort of some of this economic turmoil. But I'm shortly going to be stepping out into it, and it's a pretty bleak picture for young people. And I can see why you might, look for somewhere to invest your hopes. And the current United Kingdom doesn't look a particularly hopeful place for young folk.
No, it doesn't. And actually, it reminded me of a thing I put on another podcast where Irvin Welsh was on Newsnight, and he was asked about, the clip, it's shite being Scottish, the famous speech.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
Paxman actually said to him, well, if you lose, this self-loathing's going to become much worse, isn't it? And Irvin Welsh says, yeah, well, probably, so we better not lose. So, yeah, it kind of reminds me of that discussion, because if we have this younger generation that are totally in favour of it, or not totally, but more than others, there's two ways you could look at that. One, if we don't win this referendum, then it's looking good for the next one. And the other is if it all goes wrong, then there could be a mentality problem that people often talk about coming there, and along lines of sort of depression, self-loathing, a lack of self-respect for Scottish people, if you like. I don't know what you think, Andy.
What worries me in that context is an exodus as well. Speaking personally, in the end, I had to leave to do what I wanted to do. I had to leave, the place I grew up my entire life, and that was pretty tough. But it was also,
Yeah.
an economic reality. And so the thing that worries me in the event of that sort of, no vote and then the depression is that you do see this exodus of young people going to Europe, going to the United States, to Canada, where there are jobs, because there just won't be, increasingly it seems like there won't be in the United Kingdom jobs that, I mean, in fairness it's increasingly less of an issue as students start university now, but I know when I started in 2005, everybody told me that when I graduated with a bachelor's degree in whatever subject I took, there would be a job waiting for me. And that obviously proved to be false. And so the disillusionment for me, is the thing that worries me most. And although I would encourage those people to seek pastures new, the detrimental effect on Scotland may be quite difficult to deal with for people who are interested in independence and what it can potentially bring.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. I read a thing this week about the new phenomenon of a quarter life crisis, where people, they finish university, like you said, and they're waiting for that job that you were promised you get, and it doesn't come, and you think, oh God, what am I going to do now? And if you're saying you went through something like that, I definitely went through something similar to that. It's a big problem.
Do you think, I was one question about this young vote, and as you said, it's on this poll, 58% of Scots under the age of 25 were recorded as supporting independence, which is terrifically high. It's worth remembering, though, that was on a pretty small sample. But I think it's convincing that there is this higher level of support among young people. All of the polls have tended to show that. But one of the questions I was wondering about is why? Why might this be true? And one explanation that was being thrown around this week was that younger people aren't exposed to the kind of media narratives in the same way as people and are more middle-aged. They don't take the Scotsman. They don't take the sort of Daily Record, and therefore they miss out on the kind of framings that go on through the Scottish press about the constitutional question. Does that seem convincing, or is it sort of fetishize the young and pretend that they're just tapping away at their iPhones all the time?
No, I think there's something in that, definitely. It's quite clear at this point that most of the media is anti-independence. Generally, the people on this podcast and ourselves could be described as political obsessives, I suppose. So not only are we exposed to it, we actively go looking for it. But I suppose if you just don't see that, then if you don't see any of the constant stream of negative stories about it, then you think, why the hell not? Why not?
What do you think, Craig?
I think it's funny that you said political obsessives, Michael. I was just thinking that, because there are times I wonder. I get literally all of my, Scottish independence updates online, not being able to buy a Herald or a Scotsman. Although I do, of course, visit their websites occasionally. But I sometimes worry that, Twitter, for example, is a bit of a talking shop. Like, you're talking to people who agree with you, and so you don't get the sense to which this is really permeating. I can't, go door to door at the moment, so I don't really know. I talk to friends of mine on Facebook, but, frankly, most of my friends are inclined to vote yes and have been for a while. And so, when I see things like this, I get encouraged. I get encouraged that there is a broader base to the story, that younger people are making use of more media sources and perhaps comparing and contrasting instead of just living in one particular, but just reading the Lowlands Pete Warrior blog, for example, or they may be looking at various options and comparing and contrasting. Maybe that's a little naive to think that they're doing that. I would like to see more research done into that before I endorse it for sure. But I think Michael's right to say that there's probably some truth to it.
I recently listened to another podcast with a guy who was doing a journalism course in Dundee, and he was like 45 or something, and everyone else is 18, 19. And the teacher said, okay, right, stick your hand up if you've ever bought a newspaper. And he was the only one.
Yeah, right.
So
surprising in some respects. One of the other really interesting stories that was kind of mooted to try and explain this big difference between the young and the old, apparently, on their constitutional attitudes, was a historical one to bring us full circle. And this, I know, is neat, elegant segue as ever on this podcast, which was about the fact that the generations that have been brought up to political consciousness, if you like, after the foundation of the Scottish Parliament in 1999, are very used to devolved structures. They don't have any fond memories of when there was only the mother of parliaments in London, and that it's an accepted feature of the sort of constitutional landscape. And because it's an accepted feature, Holyrood Scottish government, that it's quite easy to envisage just taking it one step further, if you like. I don't know if that, again, do you think that's a compelling proposition, Craig?
I think so. I mean, I would fit into that category of what you just described. I was not greatly politically active or minded when I was young, when I was in sort of primary and high school. It was really when I got to university that I sort of really got into politics. And so in terms of my political consciousness, I've only ever known the Scottish Parliament. I've read a couple of books on the sort of foundation of it and the mental leaps that people in the Scottish Constitutional Convention, Kenyon Wright and others, had to get people to go through to recognise that there was an alternative to Westminster government. That I just don't think is a problem for people brought up between, or at least who kind of came to political consciousness post 1999. I think people like that are used to thinking about Scottish Parliament elections. Certainly, most of the people I know think very broadly about the Scottish Parliament. There's none of this "we pretendy Parliament" attitude. They're interested in paying attention to what the Parliament's doing. This might just be me, but increasingly I think the younger people I know on Twitter are the ones who watch First Minister's Questions as well. When I follow the hashtag, it amazes me and sort of encourages me the number of people I see who are watching FMQs and who are relatively young, which I just don't see when I click the PMQs hashtag on the Wednesdays when that's on. And that's incredibly unscientific analysis there from me, but it's something that jumps out at me every time I do it, and I don't know whether that is a reflection of younger people and their interest in the Scottish Parliament, but intuitively it seems to be true. Again, some more research would be nice, but I can certainly see the appeal of the idea.
One thing I really hope happens about this referendum process, whatever the outcome really, is that it stimulates people into taking an active citizenship kind of role, that you think about the relationship between you and the state and politics, that you maybe get involved, that you kind of come to a view on the thing. And if we're able to make a whole new generation think a bit differently about politics, then that would be amazing, or at least a chunk of them, not everybody, because endemically folk aren't going to care, and that's fine. I mean, I can live with that. But I do hope that contrary perhaps what Craig and Michael, you were saying there about a kind of rather grim prospect if we lose, that even if we lose the independence question, there's a whole generation of people that will kind of come of political age in it and have a strong sense of their ability to influence the world. I hope that's going to happen.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, well, maybe that's an ideal moment there to end this episode of the show.
Sorry, just because we talked about history, can I just put in my favourite historical quote ever, apropos of nothing? But it's shamelessly ripped off from an Open University programme I watched. But apparently, a kind of aide or associate of Chairman Mao was asked, what were the effects of the French Revolution? To which he replied, it's too soon to say.
Yep.
Which I think is just the best answer I've ever heard.
There you go. Oh well, I'm a terrible soft spot for the French Revolution, as those that have scrutinised my inverse Robespierre picture will know.
Oh, sorry, and I hate to add little bits in at the end all the time, but there was another thing. You're the lawyer, Andrew, so I'm going to grill you on this.
Okay.
Right, the thing about 1,400 pieces of legislation. Right, this thing. Now, as I understand it, in UK law, an enabling act can enable anything, right? So the fact of getting out of 1,400 things is simply one piece of paper, well, maybe two, because you need to write 1,400 things, but you write one word, one sentence, which says, all of these are now null and void, and then you have a list of 1,400 laws. Then you must renegotiate after that. Yeah, I understand that's the difficult bit, but to actually get out of those doesn't take much, as far as I'm aware.
Do you mean for a future independent Scotland?
Yeah, and also the thing about it could take years and years and years of wrangling. Well, as I think it was a fair comment that any other countries that have done this, it's taken about a year and a half on average. But the thing about the 1,400 pieces of legislation, what did you make of that? Because I thought an enabling act, you could just go, right, this one's null and void, this one, this one, this one, this one.
Well, I mean, the funny thing is that's not going to happen. I mean, the point was, I think, that if you think that Scotland will be a new state, and not a successor state in international law if we become independent, then we won't have any treaty obligations of any sort. We'll come into the world totally clean of any sort of international legal obligations in terms of treaties. So we won't even have to do that one piece of paper you're envisaging. On the timing, I mean, it's going to be complicated, but whoop-de-doo. I mean, that's not exactly a great shock that it's going to be. There's loads of different aspects of international law which has expanded really a lot in scope in recent history. But as you were saying, Scotland isn't in a new position here. There have been new states which have emerged onto the international scene recently. So I don't think it's going to be a big problem. But it's important not to be too flippant about it. It won't be done in a day. It won't be the work of a day. But I don't see that it's kind of cripplingly long-term impossible. I think that's just a piece of nonsense.
I think your point, Andrew, about not being flippant about it is also crucial. I certainly know some people who, or at least I've seen various tweets, various comments that the sentiment is, oh well, if you're just going to vote no because it's too hard, then what is wrong with you? I think that is a sort of unfortunate attitude to take for people. I think this is one of those concerns that the difficulty, the complicated nature of it, something that people should address head on and say, yeah, okay, as you just kind of did yourself, we know it's going to be tricky. We know there's going to be certain things that have to be dealt with, but think of all the, we'll deal with them. We're capable of it. Yeah. We're standing on our own 2 feet. And actually, I think the Scottish government is to be commended for taking that line on a lot of this stuff. Okay, there was the whole fudge over the EU legislation, which, you can think you want about. But since then, the line has been very consistently, okay, we'll negotiate. There's going to be a conversation about it. We'll have that conversation. We'll take it seriously, and we'll live up to our responsibility as a series of politicians who have just, taken over a completely new ship. We'll make sure all the rigging is fine before everyone gets on board.
Exactly. We have faith in Scotland's hidden powers.
Yeah, and as they say, nothing worthwhile is easy. And a part of the thing is it'll be fun. This is how we're going to reimagine ourselves. This is what creating a new nation's about.
Precisely. No, I entirely agree. So I think, oh well, that's excellent. Well, on that cheerful note, then we can close the podcast second time around. So Craig, thanks really very much for coming on.
No, thanks for having me.
And I'm sure we'll see you again. And as usual, I'd just like to say at the end there, lots of thanks to everybody who contributed towards covering our costs for this podcast and donated whatever they could. It's really appreciated. And if anyone wants to help us ensure this podcast keeps going on until 2014, then you can follow a link on my blog and pop in a quid or two if you'd like to. So I hope you'll be back with us next week. We'll be having more discussion about Scottish politics, inevitably, I'm sure, the independence referendum, and hopefully another guest who can add a new perspective on this whole important discussion. So I'll see you all next week. Cheerio!
Bye-bye.
Cheerio.
King Henry marched forth, a sword in his hand, 2,000 horsemen all at his command. In a fortnight the rivers ran red through the land. the year 1520. The